Peter? I've sort of asked this before, but I have to keep on asking over and over. If I identify I'm in some kind of trouble or have a problem, or even more recently, a couple of nights ago, I had just a horrible nightmare about my granddaughter. And it sort of stayed with me for a good part of the day. And, one of the things that you've taught us or, mentioned is to try to go, someplace else. Or, to notice, just everything. And, or even just maybe even focus on something completely strange, maybe something will happen like that too. But, in the case of a troubling or a problem, I've also tried,
We can listen to you talk.
What?
Here, I'll do it for you while you do it.
We were silent for so long.
I know. Didn't even notice it, right?
But sometimes that just doesn't work. And so, what I've tried to do is I sort of look, and, in terms of the dream, well, what does that mean? And, not to get all Freudian about it. But what I start noticing is if I ask a lot of questions about it, and sometimes it's really hard to find the right question, but isn't that a way to say, then I'm not focusing anymore on the problem or the trouble, I'm focusing on something more. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I understand. You're talking about a strategy of approaching problems in terms of asking questions as a way of taking yourself out of approaching it in the way you were as a problem?
Yes, exactly. Because, getting stuck on it is obviously, just a path to disaster. It's not going to work. It might work sooner or later, you just, time passes or something goes on, but it seems like then the trouble keeps on reoccurring. And, my idea would be to have it no trouble. The condition might exist, but just no trouble.
Well, approaching it from the point of view of problem solving, trying to solve the problem of a trouble that presents itself, is kind of fighting a rearguard action.
Right.
What this is completely undefinable. And so for you to be relating to apparent circumstances as presenting a problem means you're at least subliminally defining it, or maybe not so subliminally, maybe explicitly defining it. But the easiest time to work on that may not be when you're in the thick of grappling with a problem that you're identifying. Although you can. When a problem presents itself, it is only one very small aspect of your experience that's presenting itself at the same time. And everything else that's presenting within your experience is not the problem, and is other than the problem, and exists outside of the context of the problem, even if you're defining these other dimensions of experience. I think that the best way to deal with problems is don't worry about it. When you're in the thick of a problem, just be in the thick of a problem, and then you deal with it the way you always do. what's liable to be more productive, to the extent anything could be productive, is to notice the fact that the presence of experience is absolutely beyond definition. It absolutely cannot be pinned down. You cannot know, or let's just say analyze or define conclusively what anything presents itself as. And of course the easiest time to notice that is when you're a little less in a vortex of identification, possibly. But even then you can still do that. But even identifying as a problem and something you're trying, and then you need to find a solution to the problem is just reinforcing it as a problem. You're just feeding the notion that it is a problem and therefore it needs a solution.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like...
But that's okay. It doesn't matter. Even if you do that, it doesn't matter. The trick is to see that none of it... ultimately, the trick is to see that ultimately none of that frame of reference actually is real, is actual. And the best time to see it is whenever you can. But it might arguably be much easier to notice that when you're not caught up in the vortex of it. But if you are, don't worry about it because it'll pass. All problems solve themselves just by dissipating. Conditions will move on to other conditions, and then you'll find yourself in a condition where it's more favorable for noticing at some point, and then do the noticing then. Because, the more directly you notice how intrinsically transcendental experience is, that carries across into all of your experience. That carries across the board into all of your, even your subtle tendencies to be defining it, to be holding different frames of reference as being actual, without needing to address them directly. So in other words, instead of needing to take it piecemeal and serially, where you solve this problem and solve that problem, and analyze this problem and analyze that problem, you get that, oh, this is absolutely inconceivable. This is absolutely, transcendental. It's absolutely ungraspable. And which is not a notion. It's not a concept. Obviously you can think that and you can have it as a notion, but it's a direct feeling. You can feel that this is the case. And in that context, in being with it as a feeling, it addresses very directly the feelings of the definitionality that we hold that create these situations that seem to be problematic. It's the same thing like John brought up with risk. The whole notion of a situation being risky or not implies that there's some basis for assessing it as being risky or not, which implies a definitional framework.
Or that you're something that can be threatened.
Well, all of that. That's just more definitional framework.
Yeah.
And as you become directly free of orienting towards this in terms of these kinds of worldviews, these kinds of definitional frameworks, that is a feeling of openness and a feeling of sorry, my cold has my vocabulary a little fuzzy tonight. It's a feeling of, just of openness.
Spaciousness?
Sure, whatever. That it's actual, it's felt, it's a known certainty. And in that context, there's no basis for assessing problems versus not problems, risk versus non-risk, and all of these kinds of assessments that we're so used to have been doing all our lives are just obviously seen as childish and silly.
I recognize, I see that. Maybe, in terms of, for instance, this dream, I tried not to think about it too much, and I let them just sort of found all kinds of interesting things about it. How could it be a dream when I'm awake? and just sort of feeling textures and qualities and everything. And yes, there was a certain point where everything was transcendent, and it just...
Well, that's great. I mean, if you chip away at it at all, that's wonderful.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Sometimes, I mean, it's so sticky, like, the old Brer Rabbit story where he puts his top on, and gets stuck and he's moving around and everything.
Well, it is.
That's very difficult to transcend or dissolve.
Yeah, it is. And it's essentially impossible to dissolve because basically when you give something attention, you feed it. You reify it, you make it seemingly more actual.
Yeah.
And so naturally something that seems to be a problem, by definition you're kind of in a little feedback loop of giving it attention, which makes it more real. You're feeding it. It actually gets bigger the more of a problem it is. So yeah, these things can get out of hand, and all of a sudden you have a hurricane.
I guess you sort of have to catch yourself if that's what's happening.
Well, catch yourself or just let go. If it catches you, it's like, who cares? It's not any worse than any other problem. It comes and you go through it, and then sooner or later you'll come out the other side to one degree or another, and then you can look back on it or take stock. Because any given incident is not important. It's your fundamental orientation to your experience is important. And that is, it comes as a result of insight, but it looks as though it appears to be as if it was developed over time.
Yeah, to me it seems almost just accidental. But
Well, sure, it is accidental. Yeah. It's grace.
Grace,
It's not something you can do by trying to do it.
Right.
But it's something that can happen. And as it happens, every time this insight presents itself, every time this noticing presents itself, and you have direct experience of the astoundingness of what this is, it reorients you. It to a degree extricates you from your tendency to slap back into these frames of reference, imaginary frames of reference of defining things and interpreting things and fantasizing.
Because they are imaginary. Just think about a dream. My God, it was an actual dream. We're talking about life is like a dream. It was bizarre. Yeah.
Peter, it's listening. It occurs to me that it's not just that things are undefinable, and defining seems to make them be more than they or less really than what they are. But it's the aversion. It feeds the desire to not want whatever the discomfort is. And I find that if I just simply ride the wave of the existential experience of it, rather than inclusive of the definition or the aversion to whatever it is, but also just the feeling of it, that the definition seems to evaporate because you start feeling the real sensation of experiencing rather than, instead of making it, instead of focusing on the defining, which then brings up the aversion, which itself feeds the defining some more. It becomes a loop. You can't escape. And it seems that the only way is to sort of see that it's an experience like anything else, like an itch.
Yeah.
And then you can let go of the defining part of it.
Sure. Yeah, experience teaches what it is. It's that simple. Experience inevitably teaches what it is. It can be a long and bloody course, a very sloppy course. But ultimately experience teaches what it is. So simply just being with experience, it's a done deal. What we're discussing here are fine points of tweaking that, or playing with that, or participating in that, with the nice delusion of accelerating it or somehow stepping it up.
It's not even stepping up, I don't think, because it's immediate. It happens there.
Right.
Seeing happens instantaneously. It's like a realization in the moment.
I find that this can be very tricky because in a way it can also be a sense of denial.
What's this?
having a spacious and open approach to experience, as experience, it's almost denying the content of experience. And that is...
Well, it is, but experience is not spacious, experience is not open, experience can't be said what experience is. As soon as you start putting notions on it, you're building a prison, you're building a fantasy world, which is basically, you're just going to trip over. Yeah, sure, absolutely. Don't deny anything, but there's no content either. There's just this. You know, holding that there's content is another imaginary imposition.
Well, when content is still exposing itself
Right.
as content,
Yes.
then that's what is.
Sure, absolutely.
And I guess a transitional phase of hearing that this is not something, but it's this, denies a participation in it as...
No, it does not. No, it does not need to deny it. Just so here's a general formula: whatever you hold this to be, to whatever extent there's any holding this to be any which way or anything whatsoever, just notice that there's also more and other. The more and other that's not an either or. The more and other is not at odds with whatever you're holding it to be. It is not a denial of whatever you're holding it to be. It's just,
But it could
can't
be
say what it is.
anything. It could be
Absolutely.
anything.
Yeah, could be anything.
So, but it isn't all these things. At some point, it is how you happen to be with it. I mean,
It is that, but there's also other than that. Always.
it's always other than, but you're not always with all the others. At some, you are with it as you're with it, as it is at then.
Not really. No, you never are. Focus never happens. There's no such thing as focus. Focus is another fantasy. Oh, I focused on this. There's no this and there's no focus. It seems as if it's that way, certainly. But you can notice that it's not, because there's always more and other. Anything whatsoever, any quality or condition whatsoever exists in a context of other than itself. In other words, there's degrees of otherness. So when there's content, there's degrees of non-content simultaneously present. When there's focus, there's degrees of non-focus simultaneously present. And it's not an either or. It's not a black and white. It's not an in or out, and it's certainly not a denial or mutually exclusive. But whenever anything is seemingly present or dominant, the dominance is in the context of other than itself that is also present. In other words, things are slippery. Things are subtler than they may seem on the surface, and yet that is itself on the surface and completely accessible. And you can come to notice that. I mean, the trick is to discover that it's not mutually exclusive. It's not either or. It's not in or out. It's not you're with us or you're against us. It's not like that. It's like continuums. It's like gradients. And that applies to anything, any quality, any noun, any verb, any action, any stuff, substance. It applies to focusing, it applies to content, it applies to noticing, it applies to orientation. Anything whatsoever that seems to be anything whatever, or any mode whatever, is always isolating a peak of a wave that goes, a bell curve that just goes out to infinity.
Peter, you should switch your chair.
What did I do?
That
I
chair
can
is
switch
just
your
squeaking
chair.
like really loud.
Yeah.
Want to switch and see what this one's like?
No, this is squeaking too.
Not as bad as
How about give me the black one?
Oh, yeah, give me the
That looks like it might be a little squeaky.
maybe.
Well, the main thing is that everyone wants to.
Here, let me move one of these out. There's so many chairs there.
Looks like musical chairs.
That's right. So just, there you go. That might be even more comfy, I don't know.
It's all good.
Good, okay. Now you can jiggle and wiggle all you want.
There we go. Do you follow that? Does that make sense to you?
I guess there's always a take on something. But
There is.
You think that something is happening a
Yeah.
certain way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, it's only that particular way you happen to be seeing it at that moment.
Yeah.
And it
But
could be
even
anywhere.
when there is a take,
Yeah.
there's also, other than the take, also present, and not necessarily radically other, where you need to like go way over there, but like whatever the take is, contiguous with it, right next to it, will be something that's subtly other, or maybe not so subtly other than the take. It is also present.
Okay, now that part, let's talk about that part.
Okay,
Yeah.
we are.
Subtly present that you're not aware of. You mean that just existence, that something is happening to you? Is that what you mean? Just
Sure.
that there's isness, that
Sure, but it's not just isness in any sense of limitation.
But that you become aware of, their life is happening, or that there is.
Well, that's kind of jumping to something big. You don't need to. You can just go. You can go anywhere you go. Anything that seems to be something, that seems to have any degree of focus, is also more and other than that, which right there. And even the focus itself is not really a focus. Focus doesn't make a wall, doesn't make a boundary, doesn't draw a circle. It's this focus, but I'm focused on you visually, but I see the whole room. The room's not you. I mean, in terms of you versus it, something else, and designating objects and designating nouns, right? So, am I seeing you? Sure. Am I focused on you? Sure. But the focus is not actually a focus. What it is, what is it? Well, I can't say. How does focus work? All of a sudden, wow, you've stepped off a cliff. It's like, what is focus? It's completely weird.
Well, usually there are emergencies or issues or things that kind of have to be dealt with.
Sure. But that's kind of like what Pam was talking about. But that's when there's an emotional reaction which is already based upon a previously existing definitional frame of reference, where you're assuming that things are a certain way, and then that assumption, if it was true, implies a certain emotional urgency in one way or another.
You're assuming that things are a certain way, like they're solid and if they're...
Well, whatever. Bills have to be paid. Oh my God, I'm late paying the bills. Oh no, what's going to happen? So right away it's like bang. So the whole thing, you're on a freight train of worldview that has certain implications, and if it was true, if it was accurate, there would be consequences. There would be emotional, it'd be reasonable to have urgency about it.
Well, there are situations where there is urgency. I mean, that's part of whatever.
There may be, but you can't know what they are, and you can't know what the urgency is because you can't know what any situation actually is. You can't know, even assuming that there were discrete elements that situations were made out of, which there aren't. You can't know all the elements that make up a situation, so you can't know what the situation actually is. Mm-hmm. So you're dealing with a very shallow, averaging, partial definition of a situation based on which you're supposing certain things would happen. And any way you look at that, it falls down. It doesn't hold up. And then more fundamentally, that's just looking at it very superficially from a materialistic point of view. And then more fundamentally, even the question of whether there is a world, whether there are objects, whether there are entities, and so on and so forth, is implicit in that too. And you know.
Well, in a material world, there are consequences.
Right, but sure.
Yeah.
But as soon as you have a material world, you're already in a frame of reference. Where's the material world? You've defined it into existence. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I'm saying what it is certainly not whatever you think it is, because what it is unthinkable. So your idea of it is already erroneous. It's already inaccurate. And so then to base projections on that inaccuracy will lead to projected conclusions, which the inaccuracy will carry along every step of the way. You know, garbage in, garbage out. When you start with flawed or faulty or inaccurate, premises, you can't count on drawing accurate, sharp, reliable conclusions. And that's really the question, is to question the premises.
Right.
I mean, the logic may be, let's assume the logic is fine, which is a big assumption, but just for now, let's assume the logic is fine. But are your premises accurate?
Well, is the premise of not having a premise accurate? Because you have to deal with it.
I'm not saying to not have a premise. I'm saying to look at what that all actually is. What is the basis? What's your starting point?
The starting point is consequences.
No, consequences are derived from a situation which is held to be something, or which may be something, and then so the situation is what it is. Let's say the ground of being is what it is. Actuality is what it is, and then your interpretation of it is another step, which may, let's suppose, may or may not be accurate, and then another step is extrapolating consequences from actions. So there's 3 steps there. So even assuming that your logic is fine, even assuming that your worldview is solid, what's going on over here? What's your starting point?
You can't know that.
Can't you?
Well, so
Well, then you're just a crazy person. You're just floating in delusion. Then why worry about consequences and stuff?
I have a starting point. Oh, I have always the same starting point. If I really look, I can be heard. This could kill me. That's a problem.
exactly.
That's the only
Is it a problem? What does kill you mean?
Not really, but that's my subconscious
Right.
starting point. For any
Sure.
problem, no matter what I think it is on top, if I go down.
But see, that's not a starting point. That's already an implied conclusion based on an assumed worldview, which is being imposed on your actual starting point. See what I mean? Your starting point is the actuality of the situation, what's actually here.
Okay.
And then
reality is, you're saying reality is the starting point.
Yeah, of course. It
I
has
thought
to
you were
be.
asking her what the starting point of her consequences was.
Right. But the starting point of the consequences ultimately is reality.
Yeah.
Or if it's not, you're up
reality
Schitt's
has
Creek.
no consequence. Reality doesn't have consequences.
Well, may or may not. If it doesn't have consequences, then that follows through, and you don't need to worry about all these consequences you're worried about.
So reality equals consequences.
Or not.
Reality equals consequences to the extent there are consequences,
Yeah,
because nothing can depart from reality. We don't need to worry about unreality.
right.
Fortunately, we don't need to protect
Let's
ourselves from
forget
that.
Yeah, so we gotta deal with reality.
Yeah, you got to deal with reality.
It's the defining of it that is the problem. If there's a problem, there isn't.
So how do you deal with reality? Here it is.
For me, I just think, well, if I just get all this out of the way, then,
Then what?
then I can deal with reality.
Uh-huh. So is there an out of the way that you could actually get this? Isn't there going to be more of this to get out of the way?
Well, it's just always a little bit more, almost done, and then it's a little bit more.
It's like cleaning the house.
Oh man, it's like
You clean the house, and then what? It needs to be cleaned again.
You start at one end, you go back. Kind of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge or whatever it is.
That's the radius, right? It's radiating stuff.
That's right. That's right. Unending dirt.
Dust.
I saw that at the BART station. I always see stuff at the BART. So I got in the elevator, and in the corner of the elevator is this little pile of trash that wasn't there in the morning. And I go, that's the radiance, right? Because
That's right.
it just doesn't ever stop.
That's right.
No, never, ever, ever.
That's right.
Isn't that nice?
Shit keeps happening.
It does, and you can never sit still and just relax and like do this, meditator in the mountain thing. Something's always going to happen that will interrupt that. That's part of life, like the radiance of life. So, like, I'm on that treadmill of the errands, or whatever they are, the problem.
It's interesting. I think a few of us are thinking along the same lines tonight, because my question was, and particularly after John talked, was whether or not, my question was, is this an illusion? And it seems to me that to the extent that I ask the question, it is. But to the extent that I don't ask a question, then it isn't. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, I sort of hear what you were just talking about, and I think I'm that resonates with what I just said.
Yeah. Because illusion is subject to what do you mean by that?
To the extent that I'm not being aware of it. Although I know that illusion is within that, but illusion seems to be...
But not being aware of it is one of the major modes of being aware of it.
Sure.
I mean, ignorance and confusion is one of the major modes of awareness. What you might call unawareness is one of the major modes of awareness.
It's a bit of a conundrum.
I mean, I've been sort of noticing, Peter, that nothing is as it seems to be.
Nothing is as
But
it seems.
but sometimes I don't have this spongy radiance kind of feeling. Like sometimes I have that tangible wellness, sense of wellness, and other times I'm just like, it's just like shit.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a value judgment about one being better than it.
Right.
It feels better. I mean, it feels better.
Sure, yeah.
There's a sense of, when there's a sense of wellness, there's definitely this sort of vibrance, on
Yeah.
the cloud thing.
Yeah.
When there isn't, there isn't.
Right.
And what's that about?
The real issue is not the qualities that present themselves. The real issue is noticing this game of judging it. Of, oh, this is good, this is bad, this is better, this is not. I want this, I don't want this.
Well, it also has to do with there being a state to get back to.
Oh, all of that.
You know,
Yeah.
all the wellness, the
Sure.
wellness. Now, there's a sense of well-being, or
Yeah.
I don't know. Just there's some sort of flow happening. I guess it's flow all the time. It's just that I put myself on hold when it doesn't feel like I think
Thank
it
you.
should feel. Or,
Yeah, but you don't really put yourself on hold. You just pretend that
Calling
you
it
are.
that.
just what's that about? What's that?
That's the game. That's the game. The game of oh, I'm me and I'm doing something. I'm achieving. I'm fighting. I'm striving. I'm trying to avoid this. I'm trying to get that.
That I have some control.
Well, or even that there is control. Or even that there is something to control. I mean, just any aspect of that situation. You know.
But that's radiance
All
itself,
of,
too.
of course, it's all radiance. But playing that game may distract you, from within the terms of the game, may distract you from noticing the actual richness, the actual flow, the actual cornucopia of qualities that are continually being presented.
So rather than to put myself on hold, to dive further in.
Yeah, always,
Yeah.
always. There's always more.
Not that one can actually do that, but it's good luck if it happens.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah. You play with it. Maybe you discover some tricks or, whatever. Experience is richness. It's not good richness, it's not bad richness. And when we start turning it into good richness and bad richness, we get sucked into an absurd and very partializing game of delusion, of fantasy, that has the seeming power to cut us off from this unending, infinite, astounding multidimensionality and richness that this is. It doesn't actually, of course, you never actually cut off from it, it's always here.
Right.
That's why more and other is a golden key, because whatever is present, no matter how limited you are, no matter how tunnel vision you are, there's always more and other, right here. And just right there, not like you need if only I could get myself out of this, I could find the more and other. No, it is right here. And in that you can notice, oh my gosh, yeah, this, I'm defining this situation in terms of XYZ group of finite elements, and I'm excluding everything in between those finite elements, which is all right here.
Yeah.
Always. There's an unending field of infinite richness. You can't pin it down. It's too evanescent. It changes instantly. It changes before it even appears. And you can never say what it is. You can't hold it. You can't steer it. It's always surprising. It never repeats itself, and yet it never departs from itself. It's always just this. It's you. And, that's always the case. Even when we're not noticing it, that's the case. But it's here, so it's possible to notice it.
Well, sometimes it's more noticeable than others.
Sure. Yeah, maybe.
And then, there's sort of this sense of, stop the world, get off. The wanting to take a break.
Yeah, but that's getting into another subtle gamesmanship of, this is better noticing, this is worse noticing, that's good, that's bad. All of which collapses this whole thing down into its infinity, down to a game of finite elements.
So it's not actually being the experience, which
Yeah.
we are anyway.
Yeah. Tunnel vision is infinity. Being obsessed with a tiny little thing is infinity. Being wide open and blasted with infinite light shows is infinity. No, the one more, no less than the other.
I'm getting confused by the use of the words actual and not actual in our conversations tonight.
Okay.
Can you, think it's possible to clarify
Actuality is what is present. What is present can't be said. But some of the more accurate ways you can say it badly is to call it infinity, to call it open-endedness, to call it indefinability, to call it actuality, to call it presence.
So I get the fact that
That's
we're limited by
actual.
words, and I know we're misusing.
Well, we're not really limited by words because words aren't really words. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Well, I mean,
That's a technical.
I'll have to quit talking. I mean,
Well, you don't have
It's
to.
probably okay anyway. But,
Yeah, that's totally okay.
I'm still not clear, but I don't know.
When misunderstanding is present, misunderstanding is actuality, but misunderstanding isn't actually misunderstanding. Misunderstanding is actually infinite, indefinable presence. When tunnel vision is present, tunnel vision is actual. But tunnel vision isn't actually tunnel vision. Tunnel vision is actually the presence of infinite indefinability.
In other words,
It seems to be tunnel vision, it seems to be being stuck in a worldview, it seems to be delusion, it seems to be unenlightenment. But it isn't. Because there's nothing else present but actuality. There's nothing present but reality.
What you're saying is the context of what we're defining as tunnel vision or whatever it is we want or don't want. That is what's not actual. The definition, the so-called context, but the illusion or the tunnel vision, all that is actual. It's an experience, if you will.
Yeah. Sure.
If it's an experience, I guess it's actual, right? I mean,
Yes, it's experience is actual,
Anything.
experience is infinite, experience is openness, experience is indefinability, period.
But we were talking about this gamemanship of wanting some experience to be,
Yeah.
some experience.
This is good infinity, this is bad infinity.
Yeah, well, it is.
This is good divinity, this is bad divinity.
It is. The reality
Well,
that
that's
sucks.
okay.
The reality that you don't like experiencing. Okay,
Right.
it's rich.
So what do you do about it?
Okay, it's
What do you do about it?
You change it.
Do you? Do you?
Yeah.
Cool. Have at it.
How can you?
So I get a toothache. What do I
well, it
do?
changes things.
I call the dentist.
Yeah.
Maybe it fixes it. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe he fucks it up, makes it worse.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe I lose my jaw. Maybe I die.
But we all seem to be on this road of.
There's nothing wrong with fixing things,
Yeah.
but they aren't things and it's not fixing.
But it sounded like it's a gamemanship of thinking that some experience is better than others, and okay, it's all rich, it's all experience, but the experience that is pleasurable, it's the pleasurability of it makes it want to be repeated.
Good. So good. Go for it.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm not talking about behavior. I'm not saying to not go for pleasure and not try and avoid pain. Sounds good to me.
So what is the subtlety, though, of actually
It's all
accepting it all?
absolute, infinite, divine, radiant presence. And it's not even very subtle.
And that's not a judgment.
It's a fact. I mean, the words I use, of course, are euphemistic and poetic illusion and not accurate. But what I'm referring to is a fact. Find out what the fact is. Find out what this is. That's all. And what it is always is. And everything that happens within it, so-called, is it. Once you find what this is, then a toothache is it. A shitty situation is it. A legal problem, you have to go to lawyers is it. A beautiful, blissful experience with friends and totally fulfilling is it.
So Peter, it's not the experience per se. It's just how directly you experience it.
No, you always experience it 100% directly.
Are you experiencing it directly?
Always.
Then
There's
why
no such
is
thing
it-
as indirect. Indirect is just a mode of direct.
I don't know, but why is it that why is it that just sometimes you just go
Take a number.
from experience to experience, and
You always go from experience to experience.
yeah, of course you are. You're doing it, but it seems that sometimes it just seems that you're just. It seems. Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
It seems.
It seems.
There you go, little lady.
But it seems more direct, nicely.
Sure, sure.
It boils down to
And again,
belief.
there's nothing wrong with pursuing rainbows. You know, if you
Good luck
want
with that.
pleasure and you want to do what you think of as pursuing pleasure, do so. You know, if you want a clear experience and you want to pursue having a clear experience, by all means, try
But
to
it's
do
not
so.
something that I try. It's just
Well,
that.
whatever.
It's just that at some point, I just seems I'm just there now, and I noticed that. Whereas just a second ago, I wasn't here or there now. I mean, and so it just seems that I'm
But
being
that's,
more directly involved with the
but
experience.
that's not ever true. That's not ever actually true. When you're directly involved with the experience, great. When you're less directly involved with the experience, look at what's actually going on there.
Well, it's usually some worldview, or some.
What's a
But
worldview?
you're involved.
What's
you're
a worldview?
directly involved.
What is it? What's a worldview? How's a worldview appear? How's it being experienced?
Mm-hmm.
What's perceiving it? What's it made of?
Well, yeah. I mean,
What brings it into being?
it's it's this. I don't know.
Notice that.
Well, it's our traditional break time,
Our
so we're going to knock off for.
But we
One
never
thing
heard
you
her.
can rely on.
We never.
That's okay.
This chocolate cake. That
So we'll be back.
I didn't get a notification.
Well, I just clicked it.
Oh. He just did it. Turn your volume down.
There's no volume.
Turn your volume down.
Yeah. Say anything.
There must be a way of experiencing that multidimensionality of experience that is different than perceiving it through a viewpoint.
Well, even when you're perceiving it through a viewpoint, you're not perceiving anything through anything.
It's direct.
Because when you're perceiving a viewpoint, you're also perceiving other than the viewpoint. That's the multidimensionality right there. Whatever you're looking at, you're also looking at other than that. I mean euphemistically, not necessarily with vision exclusively. So there's your multidimensionality. And there's no limit to the otherness. It's not like whatever you're experiencing that and then something other and then it stops. It's like the otherness keeps going forever. That's the actuality of infinity. That's really quite obvious if you look at your experience. Whatever you're experiencing, you're also experiencing more than that. And then once you can notice that, then there's more than that, and more than that, and more than that, and then starting to classify it as this and then more becomes really absurd because it's an infinite continuum without boundary. And that's it.
But there is selective attention.
Sure.
So to the extent that you're selecting things to attend to, there will be some things that are being missed.
But they aren't actually being missed. They aren't actually being excluded. That's the point. Selective attention.
I'm not saying that you're excluding them. You're just not. You're not paying attention to them.
Right. But not paying attention is just another mode of attention. So in other words, you're looking at something, you're really looking at it, and that's what you're seeing, but you're also seeing other than that, even though you're not paying attention to it. You're seeing it in another way, in a way that you might qualify as being a non-attentive way, or a less attentive way, a less focused way. But ultimately you can't really qualify these different ways, because what are they? How do they work? I mean, it's all...
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I also hear her experience though too, and her experience says there's certain things that I'm not aware of, and I understand that we're aware of everything.
But anything you're absolutely not aware of doesn't exist, because because existence is experience.
I think there's a subtle distinction in what I hear them saying is that the mind isn't being attracted or attending to certain things other than whatever it's focused on. While it might at the same time still be somewhat conscious of the peripheral vision in a sense.
Right.
But if it's not there, then it doesn't exist.
But this mind that's attending to is all very slippery. What's the mind and what is attending to? What does attending to consist of? Look at that.
Well, I'm not saying it's necessarily a conscious thing. I mean,
right.
You have a close
but experience isn't a conscious thing.
Well, that's interesting. Say more.
Yeah, we want to hear that.
This makes no sense. This is not logical. This is not rational. This is not being done by a conscious mind.
I'm sorry, was that an answer?
was that a question?
Yes, it was. It wasn't my mind, it was a question.
Say more is not much of a question.
Well,
I said more. You said say more, I said more.
You certainly did. Unfortunately, I didn't understand it. So I appreciate there are many things that we're not conscious of that we're still taking in.
Right.
So there is an awareness, but
sure.
it's not up front.
Right.
Exactly. Is all
sure.
I'm saying.
Yeah. Sure. But exactly what is upfrontness? How does it work? What does it consist of? What is upfront versus not upfront? Yeah. And what's degrees of upfront versus less upfront versus even less upfront versus really, really less upfront? Mm-hmm. And what's going on with that and how does that work? Those are all very interesting questions.
Right.
And just because something is less upfront, is it less present? Or is it just present in it with a different sort of textual mode? God knows how you qualify something like that.
Those other dimensions, for example.
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Experience has infinite ways that it can present, and most of them are very nebulous and vague and iffy.
One thing I remember John saying something about you looking behind where John could see, and he described it as sparkles. And I really like that. Do you remember that? It was a few times ago. No, you don't. You probably weren't even here, John.
I have no recollection of it.
No, I think I hear what you're saying.
I mean, it sort of segues very loosely into your earlier question of what is actuality. Actuality is what is present, but it's not what you think it is. And all of these experiences, what is present, but all of these different modes of experience are not what we think they are. So focus, lesser focus, awareness, less awareness, unawareness even. We think we know what these are, or we may think we know what these are, but we don't. We don't know what they are. And simply the actuality of what it actually is actuality. And it's not whatever you could think. It's unthinkable. So by definition, it's not what you can think it is. No matter how elaborate and sophisticated and brilliant and ingenious your conceptions are, they're wrong. Because what this is intrinsically unthinkable. Can't be thought. But it doesn't need to be thought because here it is. You have the real thing, you don't need to model it.
So that applies also to paranoia, delusion, and fantasy. That, you know, the most elaborate type of unreality that we can come up with isn't what we think it would be.
Of course.
But you're saying that that's not unreality. Because
No.
it's in reality anyway.
Yeah, unreality cannot exist. What presents itself, what is experienced, is actuality. But it's not what you think it is. And the only way you can seem to get yourself in trouble is by what you're thinking it is. Of course, you aren't actually getting in any trouble because you never depart from actuality.
Well, and I think that's what I was trying to get to when I said it's just as soon as I ask a question, or as soon as I start to define it, or as soon as I even start thinking about it,
Yeah.
I'm already limited.
Exactly, of course you are. But you aren't really, because language is actually unlimited. Because limitation is unlimited. Limitation isn't really limitation. Conceptualization isn't really conceptualization. You can't say what it is. You can't say what anything is, so there's no reason to suppose it's limited. Limitedness can't actually exist in this reality because this reality is made of unlimitedness. That's the only building blocks you have around. And you can't build limitedness with bricks of unlimitedness. It doesn't work.
Well, and I suppose, I'm guessing, I suppose that that's the illusion. That's the delusion, if you will.
Which of that?
Well, this assumption of
Limited.
Of limitedness.
limitedness
Yeah.
versus unlimitedness.
Yeah.
It gives us some kind of framework.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Get rid of the
Yeah.
frame.
Yeah. And you think that's a good thing. I built this wonderful jail. Let me show it to you. I'm so proud of it.
Boundaries can be
I made the
useful at
ceiling with
times.
clouds.
It seems.
Stars. It's really pretty.
Well, I'm just saying that, you know, sometimes that I have, you know, when I have the delusion about what this is, that doesn't feel good,
Mm-hmm.
then I think that there's a better delusion that I can come up with,
Yeah.
when in fact neither of them are of any consequence.
Right.
Or they're not accurate.
Yeah. I mean, this is very typical. What we do is we try to, I mean, particularly in the spiritual arena and the seeking arena, is try to upgrade our delusions. You know, it's like, boy, this is I've got this all wrong. Let me get a better take on it, and then eventually we want to trade up again. You know. And when it finally penetrates that, it's not about getting a better interpretation, it's about seeing that the interpretations are irrelevant. It's not that you need to stop doing them, they're just irrelevant.
Well, they're of no use, really.
Yeah, they're of no
because
use.
They never will produce any actual.
The delusions keep on coming. You
They
just
will
don't-
keep on
absolutely.
coming, yeah.
You just don't pay. Yeah.
They're irrelevant,
Take
is
them
all.
seriously.
You need not pay too much heed to them, though.
Yeah, because you're not actually dependent upon them.
Well, they're not actually related to the experience.
Yeah, exactly so.
That's the definition of delusion, is that they're not related to anything.
That's right.
Their experience, delusion parading as experience.
Maybe you could say experience parading as delusion.
Experience parading as delusion.
Well, that's what it is.
There's not even any real use in noticing that delusion is different from experience either.
Mm-mm. experience.
No, it's not.
Right.
Well, that's in a really big scheme. I mean, that's in an ultimate sense. But in a conventional sense, there could be something problematical about delusion. Do you know what I mean? I mean, really, I mean, you know.
What's a conventional sense?
You know, paying the bills, you know, going to court, you know, raising your children. You know, that could be. That could call for skillful means, you know, as the Buddhists would say.
Certainly, but skillful means has nothing to do with delusion. You don't need to misinterpret things to try to do them well. For example, when I leave here tonight, we're going to get in the car and we're going to drive home, and I'm pretty sure we'll make every effort to not get in an accident. However, I know quite well that the car isn't really a car, the road isn't really a road, the trip isn't really a trip, the space we're going through isn't actually space. And a non-accident versus an accident, both of those are completely indeterminate. But that in no way gets in the way of attempting to drive home without getting in an accident.
Or paying the bills.
Yeah.
Or anything.
I mean, knowing that they're not bills doesn't get in the way of paying them. When I say they're not bills, that means that they're not what you think they are.
Right, I was just thinking if you...
In other words, functionality does not depend upon a limited view of things. It's not like you see reality and you all of a sudden, all you see is like plain vanilla white flashes and all of a sudden you can't walk or wipe your ass anymore. On the contrary, you see what everything is very, very clearly.
Well, and that has to be true across all time and space, in all circumstances, really.
What's that?
Well, just in the sense that functionality works in the smaller things and in the bigger things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True, functionality
It doesn't
because...
stop working just because it's a smaller or more.
Yeah, because functionality isn't something that you as an individual are doing. Functionality does not depend upon an erroneous misinterpretation of things.
What you are
Functionality
is functionality.
Yes, functionality is something that arises within reality.
Not
And you
what
can't say
are.
what it is and you can't say how it is. And our descriptions of it are all fine, but they're all inaccurate. So I can say we're going to try and drive home without being in an accident, but that description is wholly inaccurate in terms of accurately reflecting or capturing what the actual event will be. But nonetheless, we're going to try and drive home without getting in an accident.
It's like that TV
And that can happen.
commercial where the guys are driving in the car and they're listening to some really mellow music and they're going through a rough neighborhood and they just glide by. You know? They're just cruising. You know,
I was thinking a little bit more along the lines of people, let's say fellow workers or people that you live next door to, who take certain things very seriously and very concretely, and it might call for skillful means to help in your own way to minimize.
But wouldn't you think that...
Sure, but that doesn't require delusion. That doesn't require...
No, I'm suggesting
worldview.
that is an example of a kind of a delusion, kind of an illusion.
What aspect of it
is to see things as very concrete, very limited.
In what way would getting along with deluded neighbors require seeing things as concrete?
If called upon to help them take it less concretely, less seriously.
But you can't help them take it less concretely from a more concrete point of view.
I think I don't have to get involved in how seriousness, or rather how serious the situation is, or how concrete the situation is from their point of view.
Right. Yeah, sure. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Great.
No, I seem to be suggesting that a certain amount of a concrete point of view would be of benefit, and
Yes.
I don't understand how.
Well, skillful means, wouldn't it, skillful means either happens or doesn't happen, and it comes from out on its own. It's not like you can anticipate, I'm gonna be skillful, because you might or you might not be skillful, no matter what your so-called mental intention was, your intellectual intention was. I mean, that's happened to me, for sure. I'm not particularly skillful with neighbors who are very deluded. So, but my intentions are always to try and be courteous and not take anything they say too seriously, but at the same time, sometimes it's skillful, sometimes it's not, but I never certainly intend to not be skillful. Mentally, I mean, intellectually I don't, so I see it more as automatic. And when it's not skillful, I go, fuck, that one seems fucked up a little bit, that's okay. And another one comes along. Somehow or other, it doesn't change how how my experience is with them. And I find it all rather amusing most of the time, so. We have one witch of a neighbor across the street, mind you. Oh shit! But she's just plain funny now, because it's like, I'm sort of glad I don't have her experience, whatever that is. But it usually doesn't have, I mean, I don't have to think about it. I find if I think about it, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Is that what you're getting at, sort of, that skillful seems to be a purposeful thing?
I was trying to make a recognition of is that people are involved in their dramas, and it's really easy to sort of fall into their dramas.
Oh, get sucked in. Oh, yeah.
And so my idea of skillful means is to
Not
try to
get sucked in.
sidestep those a little bit, and yet not piss them off while you're doing it. That's all.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
no
that's,
big deal.
yeah.
When you said earlier, this is not a conscious mind.
Right. There's no such thing.
What, an unconscious mind? No, conscious.
In other words, it's so much more than you are aware of it, experiencing.
You could say that.
I don't know, when you said that, I just felt these clamps just unclamp.
Nice. Well, feel it. Don't try and make sense of it. I mean, the conscious mind isn't cancelled out by observing that it's not a conscious mind. It stops mattering, it stops being relevant whether or not you're holding it as being a conscious mind, and you can observe it as being other than that, and all of a sudden you discover a greater richness, a greater openness, a greater possibility, a non-separation, a non-exclusivity between this mode and that mode that may have before that been held to be somehow separated.
It's like you never really know where you are.
Right.
Because,
And in that not knowing is the true knowing. That's the way you do know where you are. You can't know where you are definitionally. You can't know where you are by defining it or by drawing a map or by conceiving of it. But in the realization that you can't do that, you discover where you actually are, and that is a certainty.
to be in just such a completely different space from having been in another space that seemed to be real,
Uh-huh.
or ordinary, or
Uh-huh.
made that other space just completely erroneous, or
Yeah.
so that this space would be the same as that.
Might be. Well, it is the
And
same as that.
in that it can change to a completely other, just different
Sure.
person, place,
Sure.
perspective, viewpoint.
But it can and it can't. It can't.
Of-
It can if you're seeing it partially. It can't in terms of its actuality. If you're seeing it in terms of the characteristics that seem to be presenting, defining it in those terms, then those characteristics can change. Because any characteristics, this can present itself as any characteristics whatsoever. And yet, this is this, and this is that which can do that. This is that which does do that. But when you're relating to what this is in terms of, oh, this is this set of characteristics, it's openness, or it's closeness, or it's this, or it's that, then you're not relating to this, you're relating to an arbitrary grouping of characteristics that you're basically defining in your mind. What this is beyond characteristics, but what this is a never-ending generator of endless characteristics, i.e. qualities, experiential qualities, call them, on every level of experience.
But it seems to be experienced from a particular perspective or feeling tone, viewpoint. I mean, it's like you're coming at it from a physical presence of seeing it. And that can flip to something else. I mean,
Anything that can flip to something else is imaginary, is partial.
well, okay, I'm talking about the taking a identification
Right.
with
Yeah, identification is always partial,
is
always imaginary.
but it's locatable, but it comes from a vantage point. Or
Yeah, it defines location and defines
Yes.
vantage point into
Yes.
existence as an aspect of the identification. Identification is bootstraps itself up out of nothing, essentially, out of indefinability, and it presents a whole worldview. It presents a location, it presents a viewpoint, it presents a seeing from, it presents what's being seen, it presents how it's being seen, to whatever range of parameters. But what this actually is none of that. And yet this shows up as any of that any time.
But I guess my question is, it seems to be known from this bootstrapping up of identification to perceive it, to be a part of it or witness it.
That may seem to be the case, but that's not what's actually happening. Look at how it's actually appearing.
Well, it's so different from what it was that I can see that if it's that different from what it was, it could be different in
That's just
many
fantasy.
different
That's
ways.
just fantasy. Maybe yes, maybe no, but that's an idea. Be with actuality. Be with what is present right here.
Isn't that from a perspective? It's from a...
What perspective? It's
a
this.
viewpoint.
It's this. Where would the viewpoint be? Here's this. Where's the viewpoint? This is the viewpoint. It's its own viewpoint. Viewpoint comes with what you're calling a viewpoint. A viewpoint's just an abstraction.
If it's coming from a viewpoint, it's an interpretation.
This is present. It's not present from anywhere. It's not present to anywhere. It's just present. Right? This is present, right? Can you feel that? This is present? Your experience is present? Where's it coming from? I mean, that's gibberish. It's meaningless. Where's it go? Where's it present? What is it present to? It's meaningless. It's gibberish. It's just present. It's the beginning and end of it.
Well, when it was present, okay, a little while ago, it was present physically. I mean, when it's present as something opening up from having not been opened up, it's perceived from a physicality. that was constricted and then,
There's always physicality, but physicality can't be defined or limited or pinned down to anything. It's all physicality. It's all mentality.
it's all physicality, all mentality.
Sure, find some physicality and then find where that physicality ends. Can you find a boundary? Can you find a point where the physicality ends and then what's on the other side of it? You can't do that. It's continuous. It's this. Whatever this is, it is this within the field of its being. It's gradients. There's no breaks. There's no moats. There's no, unbridgeable gaps. There's no walls. There's no edges. It's there. Look and see. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I was just curious about a contraction that seemingly didn't seem to be there until it was
Right.
exposed and eliminated.
Yeah, but that's the nature of these worldviews that we get sucked into within the mechanism of belief. They seem to be actual. They seem to simply be objectively true until they're revealed to not be, and then all of a sudden you find yourself outside of them, and wow.
Well, okay. I'm just thinking maybe the wow is just another contraction.
Maybe it is.
That will.
Maybe it is. But a more interesting question is, what's a contraction? Where does that happen? How does that happen?
You don't even know it's there until it's exposed, until you become aware of it. It's like, you're like this, and then all of a sudden you see that, and then it's gone. And
Well, don't worry about trying to make sense of it. Just exercise it.
Yeah, well, I was just curious about
If this is if you're actually in another contraction unbeknownst, break out of that.
Yeah. I mean, just where identity comes from, or what that is, or how.
Identity is worldviews. Identity is essentially belief systems. Identity is just fundamentally holding this to be a certain way. And what this is intrinsically cannot be held to be anything. In short, one sort of rule of thumb is if you, to any extent whatsoever, can say where you are, you're in delusion.
Yeah,
Or I mean that,
Really?
or not you're not in delusion as a space that you're in, but that saying is inaccurate.
yeah.
That holding is inaccurate. That holding is not actually the case. What this is cannot be said, cannot be thought, cannot be conceived, cannot be believed in. And yet within it, endless thoughts and holdings and beliefs can arise and appear and disappear. And it's not affected by that at all.
The present is what this is, always.
Sure.
So anything that you believe, or you interpret, or you is...
You're out of the present.
You're never out of the
You're
present.
never out of the present. You're not out of the present.
You can't be out of the present.
But it's
You can't be out of reality.
It's
It's impossible.
irrelevant. It's a distraction.
It's a partiality. This never-endingly presents itself as virtual partialities. This never-endingly presents itself as possibilities or hypotheses of maybe I'm this, maybe it's that, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Never-endingly, like the way a sparkler is sending off sparks continuously. This continuously sends off versions of itself, partial versions of itself, hypothetically. But they occur within this. They arise within this. They never depart from this, and they're not actual. They're not true. They're not accurate. They are actual. They're actual radiance. They're not actual worldviews. Except there's no you and there's no here, but yeah.
Well, there's no here as
Well, don't worry
quote
about.
here, but it's just
Yeah, just this.
happening that then.
Just
Just
this.
this.
Just this. Just this. This is reality. Exactly what it is and exactly as it is. And that can't be said. It doesn't need to be said because here it is. Never goes away. It's easy. Does itself. And all of that, those other elaborate versions are just about this anyway, right? They don't ever actually depart from this. All of those worldviews that we play with, they're just about this. They don't add anything to this.
Just all this machination.
Yeah, true. Well, and all that takes place within this, consists of this, and doesn't affect this one way or the other. It doesn't damage this, doesn't improve it.
What's this doing it to itself?
Sure. It can look like anything. Not with a bang. Good night, online people.